thank you, Dr. Spencer, and every one of our panelists today. Thank you for being here. I want to thank you all for joining us for the teacher breakout session, Centering Racial Equity in the Classroom. During this session, we will explore the steps to building an equity-centered classroom. We do want to remind everyone that we will still be following our code of cooperation for this breakout session, and we encourage everyone to be respectful of everyone joining us today. Please remember to place all questions for our panelists in the Q&A. I know a lot of times we want to put the information in the chat, but please be reminded that we would love for you to put them in the Q&A at the bottom towards the end of the panel so that we can, and you can also interact with the other individuals that are in our meeting today in the chat. What I'm going to do for the sake of time, because the last session was so engaging, everybody wanted to just continue, I'm going to introduce myself and then I'm going to pass it to someone and I'm going to ask that person to pass it to the next person just for the sake of time. I am Dr. Connie Locklear. I'm director of our Title VI Indian Education Program here in the public schools of Robeson County. We oversee one of the largest Title VI grants in the nation. My background is mathematics. I have spent 28 years in education, nowhere else I would rather be. I have served as a math teacher, a college professor. I've taught middle school all the way up to college. I've also worked as a curriculum supervisor for our district. And I spent many years working with Teacher Academy before it was demise. I hated that. That was wonderful training. Love Teacher Academy. I have had the opportunity to serve on many committees. I currently serve as the chairperson for the Borough's Welcome Student Service Enrichment Program. I also am appointed member by the General Assembly for the PEDSIC program, the Professional Educator Preparedness and Standards Commission. I serve as first vice president of the National Indian Education Board of Directors, and I am an advisory board member for the Dudley Floyd Center for Educational Equity and Opportunity. My greatest rewards in life are being a mother, being a wife, and being a nana. I now have 3 beautiful grandchildren, and I'm so proud of them. And I am also a proud and enrolled member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. So I'm going to kick it off to Valencia, and then she'll just turn it over to the next person. I hope everybody's doing great today. So Valencia, if you will introduce yourself.
All righty, good afternoon. And Dr. Locklear, you're making my heart race. You're going so fast. Hopefully I will be able to capture who I am. Again, I am Valencia Hicks Harris. It's a mouthful. I always joke and say that I had to appease my dad and my husband at the same time with that. But I am a product of Wake County Public School System. I also worked in Wake County for several years as an elementary educator. Currently, right now, I'm a doctoral student, second year at NC State in educational equity. We are still recruiting people, so join us in this work. And I am the proud founder of a brand new nonprofit, Empower All Incorporated. I would be remiss if I didn't shout out my 4-year-old son. So I am a mom, a wife, a sister, and a daughter, and I am super excited to be here. And I will pass it on to Juan.
Thank you, Valencia. How's everyone doing today? I'm excited to be here, especially on this great panel that we have in front of us. I'm originally born in Virginia, but I've been in Charlotte since 2012. It's considered home now. I am a newly proud father of a 9-month-old son and my wife. So we're doing well. I'm with Profound Gentlemen. I currently serve as a senior strategic operations partner for the nonprofit. Our mission is to build communities of male educators of color that make a profound additional impact in the field of education. I'm excited to join you all to just have conversations about centering racial equity within our classrooms and within our schools. And I'm excited to carry the conversation through. I will pass this along to Michelle.
Thank you very much, Juan. My name is Michelle Ellis, and I am a science teacher in Gaston County. I am also a PhD candidate through Texas Tech, guns up. And my research is actually on the global and cultural competence of STEM educators in North Carolina. So that's very exciting. And also, I am the lead facilitator for the Seed Fellows program, which is sponsored by Borough's Welcome Fund, which stands for the STEM Educators for Equity and Diversity for North Carolina. And I'll pass it on to Susanna.
Thank you, Michelle. My name is Susanna Serrato. It's nice to see everyone. I am a proud third grade teacher for Ira B. Jones Elementary School in Asheville City Schools. I've taught there for 6 years. I'm the school improvement team chair. I've led professional development for the district in equity for 3 years. But I'm also the 2021 Boroughs Welcome Fund Western Regional Teacher of the Year. And I serve on the Board of Advisors for the North Carolina Education Corps, as well as I'm the founder and facilitator for the Asheville City Schools Educator Advisory Council. It's its inaugural year. Right now, I said I've taught here 6 years. Prior to that, I was an instructional coach in New Orleans, Louisiana, and a general education teacher there for years. In the charter schools of post-Katrina. And prior to that, I taught in New York City, where I got my master's in critical special education from Teachers College. So I've been in education for 12 years. And right now, I'd be remiss not to say my proudest moment is as a mother of my 6-year-old who's in first grade in Ira B. Jones. Watching her grow is profound. But also, I'm currently so proud of the work I'm doing with my regional cohort, led by Eugenia Floyd. We are really working to empower students through elevating teacher voice. And I'm enlivened every day by the work we're doing, and I'm enlivened today to be here with all of you. So thank you for including me.
Thank you all for being here today. And I'm so thankful to be amongst such great colleagues. And I know that we do this work because we love it. My goal for doing this work is I never want a child to be invisible in the classroom. And I remember what that was like sitting as a student in the classroom. But we're going to go into our questions. The first question, when we talk about centering racial equity or having a racial equity lens in the classroom, what does that mean? Especially in our current climate, COVID-19, remote learning, and just current events. What does that look like in a classroom? What does it look like for students? And what does it look like for teachers? Susanna, would you like to take that question?
I'd love to. It's a very strange space to be in right now in all regards, but particularly when considering that really, equity's always had a sort of a base understanding of access, right? So what COVID did was shed a huge flashlight on the inequities across the board, but particularly in terms of who has access to learning in a time like this, and who has access to learning at all times. When I've thought about centering racial equity in schools, in instructional spaces, I've thought of it as, that first process of reflecting and sharing backgrounds related to race. And that was certainly, an enormous process, an important process for me as a Northern Yankee coming down to the charter schools of New Orleans, teaching predominantly Black students as a brand new white educator. That was imperative to my process as an educator when I first began there. And then from there, learning strategies to make classrooms not just more welcoming, but more productive for every student. I think that the National Equity Project's definition of instructional equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails, and then interrupting the practices that negatively impact students, and particularly students of color, immigrant students, poor students of any race. And so when I think of the practices in my classroom that have worked towards eliminating those practices that negatively impact students or create barriers, it is always grounded in community building. It is always grounded in creating a space that's low stress and high trust. I've done a lot of work digging into Zaretta Hammond's definitions of culturally responsive teaching. I led professional development for a district around her incredible text. And I've never been able to get away from this image of the learning pit, right? That there are these dependent learners that are afraid to take that leap because there's constant triggers happening that stand in the way of building that trust. And so the practices I see are, my practices are just centered in restorative, they're centered in restorative practices and responsive practices of community building. So the most important moment of my day is the community meeting. It could sometimes last an hour, and it is a routine that is anticipated every day that not only allows for connection, I mean, even just the image of the circle, I'm explicit about this with my kids. You know, we're sitting in a circle because no one is more important than anyone else.
Mhm.
There are, you know, engagement strategies around building empathy maps so that not only I can make, you know, instruction more engaging because I'm tapping into the identities of my students, but they're able to connect. And I love how Hammond defines culture as not, you know, what we do and what we eat and who we live with, but how we make sense of the world. And so how can you interrupt those negative practices if you're not helping create a space where you're learning from each other about how each of us make sense of the world? And something as fundamental as that circle can do that. I want kids to jump into that learning pit with me. And so, you know, for students, it's setting goals, understanding that they're partnering with their instructor and with their peers. Feeling like the way that they learn is seen and valued and reflected and responded to in the ways in which learning happens in the space. So I'm a huge, loud, stand on the mountain, die on that hill of, it's not a simple routine. It's actually the sort of what undergirds a safe environment, because no student's going to want to take that risk if they don't feel safe. I'm not a huge proponent of the word grit. I think it's really problematic. I think that it's really more about safe. And so courage comes from safety, ironically, in my opinion, especially in the instructional space. So that's where it's always been grounded for me. And identifying practices for interrupting racism in schools, I think, is grounded in that piece of seeing the individual culture of each person and creating environments where they want to share that with each other.
Okay. Juan, would you like to take on that question as well?
Yes, it's going to be hard to follow up what Susanna just put on the. I mean, she provided a lot of resources, and I love the research that Serrato Hammond does, and she also speaks a lot about, when thinking about racial lens, being able to dive into those deep levels, right, and going beyond the surface level of your students as well as your staff members. When one of the researchers I like to follow is Mika Pollack, who speaks a lot about high help and high perfection that we usually don't experience with our minority students in classrooms. So finding a balance in ways in which we can bring our full self into the classroom, but also be able to engage and provide the necessary support that our students need. A lot of what Profound Gentleman does in our work is we provide resources to our male educators of color so that they can fully show up as themselves. And through this 3C model that we have, honing in on their character first, goes back to what Susanna mentioned about being yourself, finding your identity, your values, and your beliefs. And that only makes our educators stronger as they walk into their classrooms, understanding who they are before they can even touch the content. But to a further extent, thinking about some of the nuances that take place in the classroom that we oftentimes as educators may experience as our unconscious bias. When we think about student silence and thinking about how we interpret a student's silence and being mindful of remembering that student is an individual that's part of a larger group. How do we not impact that student's ability to grow by shunning on them the stereotypes that may be present within their groups as a whole, finding the individual nature of these students and our educators, and providing them with the necessary support to fully show up as themselves is one of the main reasons, the main ways in which we can really center our racial lens with regard to our classrooms and our schools.
Thank you so much. That leads right into our next question. When you stated embracing oneself first is so powerful. And I think that lands itself right to our next question, where it says, our question is, how does addressing your own racial biases play into centering racial equity in the classroom? How does an educator go about addressing their own racial biases? So Valencia, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I feel like I'm in church because I'm over here saying amen, amen, amen to everything that you all have shared, and it lets me know I'm in the right place. So thank you for that. Well, first, I think that conversations about race are truly discomforting. And if we're honest with ourselves, conversations about ourselves when we're doing a deep dive into looking into self is truly discomforting. So before we can engage in any type of equity work and centering equity in our classroom, we have to focus on ourselves first. I mean, equity work is not just hard work, it's hard work. And only we know what causes our heart rates to slow down or speed up or even skip a beat. I often think about going to the doctor, going in for those wellness checks. We do those annually, right? So I think we oftentimes need to do a wellness check on where we are. I mean, additionally, I think about when you're on an airplane, right? And the flight attendant comes over and says that you have to put the mask on yourself before you can help anyone else out. So we have to unmask our own bias. We have to identify what lens we are looking through. We have to identify our positionality. I'm a Black female educator with elementary STEM as my background, so I'm always going to be looking through that lens. When we discuss what educators should do to address your own racial bias, I'm thinking critical self-reflection. That was the first thing that I was charged to do as I entered this program. Doing a deep dive and looking at your first instances with race really helps you to identify the who and your why you move and why you do the certain things that you do. I would encourage you to find an accountability partner or two, surrounding yourself with people who will call you out or call you in, who will push you, who will question you, who will challenge you. I'm a huge advocate of courageous conversations. So understanding where you are on the compass, really helping you to find your center. We are often told that we have to leave our personal things at the threshold of the door. For years I tried, but that's nearly impossible. Instead, we have to have authentic conversations with our students. Oftentimes when I had those authentic conversations, Ms. Harris, how you doing on a 1 to 5? When I was really honest, that's when my students led. They said, Ms. Harris, I got this. I can lead this. I can give you a high five. Here's a picture. Here's this or here's that. So if we're looking at action steps, and I'm really about action, dive into critical self-reflection. Identify those accountability partners. Find your center. Be authentic and build community with your students. I'm a huge advocate of restorative practices as well, Susanna, and it really helps to build community.
Woo woo, girl. All right, Michelle, would you like to add to that?
Now I know how Juan felt. But no, I should echo what Valencia said. Especially when you address your own bias, you have to be prepared that you are going to have an emotional and mental experience that is going to be tough. And you have to be prepared to push past that, past the fear, the guilt, all these emotions to get to where you need to be, and understand your role in racism in America, in the classroom, in it as a system, to understand that and to make changes. So Valencia said there's action. So we start with an awareness, and then we're aware of that, and then we take action. Because it's 2021, it's not enough to not be racist. We have to be anti-racist, and that means you are actively pursuing justice in this system that we have. But I did have a few suggestions as educators. One, beware that we have coded language that we are sometimes not aware of, that there's coded language. I was in a session at a conference earlier yesterday, and it really gave me a different perspective. We were talking about AP, the gap in AP and higher level courses, and someone in their good intentions, I'm sure, said, well, we need to be aware that we cannot put students in there that are not prepared to be in there just for the sake of saying we're doing equity. And I'm sitting there thinking, who are these pronouns? Like we know that she's like setting the kids up for failure. That's coded language. Okay, you have a variety of individuals and students that we must pursue and champion for them like we would any other student. Another thing we hear common still, I don't see color. I always hated that. You see color. Okay, what you're trying to do is deny it's there because, again, something's making you uncomfortable. What makes you so uncomfortable with someone that you don't want to see who they are? Because that is what it says, how we identify with ourselves. So that is, again, something we have to look at. And remember that we have conscious and unconscious bias, and we must be able to identify that. Some things were innate and trained throughout the systematic racism that we have, and we're not aware that this is something that we do. So understanding what that is. And lastly, normalizing culture. was something I heard earlier from the early panel, normalizing culture, getting to learn, integrating that into your curriculum, but also going with a little bit of Juan said, well, the culture, how a culture responds to certain things. So even when I think about AAVE, African American vernacular, and it's how it's always corrected, but really when you look at the roots, it's African. So certain things we say, that is how it goes, and it's our culture, but it's seen as incorrect. And it makes me think of Dr. Brian Brown, Science of the City, when he's talking about vocabulary. So accepting not only that there's other cultures and going to investigate and incorporate, but also understand there's cultures within your classroom that you have to be aware of as well.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I just enjoyed this conversation. It just reminds me so often, I share with teachers that sometimes when we ignore a child's culture, we're ignoring everything about that child, everything that their parents have said to them, their grandparents, their aunties, their uncles, everything that they've been taught that they bring to that classroom. So with that being said, the next question: how have you seen culturally responsive pedagogy and curriculum impact your students' outcomes, academically, socially, and emotionally? What are the benefits for all students? And are there benefits for culturally responsive pedagogy for all students, not just for students of color? And what are steps that can be taken, that we can take when you are working with a parent or colleague or administrator who is not supportive of culturally responsive curriculum or pedagogy? Because we know sometimes everybody's not on the bandwagon with us. So what steps could be taken? So Valencia, if you don't mind, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm a huge advocate of culturally responsive, culturally sustaining, however you want to name it. I am a fan. It truly positively impacts all students, not just our Black and brown students, but all students. It is an active process of beliefs, understandings, a practice that really empowers students intellectually, emotionally, socially, and politically. At its core, it fosters an environment in which students feel safe to be fully human. They can show up their full self, meaning that students' cultures are affirmed and have a sense of belonging. Oftentimes, students recognize the interconnectedness with one another when they're able to show up their full self. So, I know earlier it was mentioned the Zaretta Hammond. I go back to, it's about the brain, right? Now, yes, STEM is my background. I will not even try to fake like biology is my thing, but I know in that text, it talks about the amygdala, and that is how we process our emotion and attaches emotional meaning to memory. So if that is in dysfunction, learning cannot take place, right? So we have to make sure that students feel safe and belong so that learning can happen. That is what we're here for, right? So I would tell people, I say no to marginalization. I no longer want my students in the margins. I want to center all of my students so that no one is left out. So if you want to take that step, do it. Be brave, be bold, find your co-conspirators, talk with your leadership, talk with all aspects, all staff involved, all parents and students, and do this work.
Thank you, Valencia. I'm going to turn it over to Susanna.
Being fully human. I mean, that's the takeaway, really. I mean, that's the crux of it, is allowing people to be fully human. I saw something in the chat that really resonated with me when thinking about this question. And someone made a point of saying that some teachers treat parents as the enemy rather than the support system. And I've often found that there's an inherent fear of families. And one of the benefits of the year, that initial year I had in New Orleans actually, was just throwing myself into partnership with families. And I had a mentor in New York City who would always start every parent-teacher conference with any family with, you're the expert, you're one of the experts on your child. What is it that I can learn from you? And nothing has stuck with me more than that as an educator. And when I think of the question, how have I seen culturally responsive pedagogy have an impact? One of my years in New Orleans, I had a student, and I like to just shout him out. His name's Nikai. He's in college now, killing it. But he carried with him so much trauma. He would enter rooms and hear laughter and assume it was at him and would run. There was that amygdala hijack for sure. Oh, my cat, excuse me, at a constant pace for him. So one of the things that I saw happen was that he took to the community meeting more than anyone in my classroom. And the reliability of it, the connection of it, the circle of it, he needed that sense of trust. And I watched over the course of 8 months, his cortisol just drop, however slowly, but through partnership with his family, through that consistent created safe space for him every single day. By the end of the year, he was leading the meetings and he felt nurtured. He had relationships. He no longer had that trauma-informed reaction to small events. So when I think about how it has an impact, sure, I can show you how test scores might have been affected, or I could show you how reading levels have grown, but that's less important to me than seeing students who are carrying trauma of whatever kind into the room arrive at the end of the school year with a greater sense of safety and trust in themselves, and that there are people in the instructional space that have their back, that they don't have to rely on their fight or flight instincts to survive, that they have a community, and that will inherently affect their ability to learn. Because much like Valencia was saying, you can't learn if your brain is on fire. You can't learn if you want to run away. So my priority is first and foremost, always create a space where that cortisol level drops. And if I'm confronted with a system or with an environment that is objecting to that kind of approach, I just show them the data, right? I show them how much more engaged the student is. I show them the relationship I have with the family. And I do believe those anecdotal stories, and I do believe that kind of observational data is powerful. I really do.
Thank you, Susanna. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Historical trauma can be passed down from generation to generation to generation. And I remember years ago, I sent some information home for a student to participate in this event, and the dad wouldn't sign it. So I went out to talk to him, and he shared with me the story about how his grandfather paid for land all his life, and when he died, he still didn't own it. So it was that historical trauma of signing paperwork. So we had to share that information. But thank you so much for that. Building trust is so powerful among our children of color. It's so important, not only with the children, but with their parents. So now we'll move to our next question. You guys are on fire. I'm really loving this, and time is passing by too quickly. Okay, having a diverse and representative teaching workforce has become a major priority in North Carolina. What supports do teachers of color need to enter and stay in the educational pipeline? And I want to ask you this, and y'all can add to this, but why does that matter? Why is it important to have teachers of color in the classroom? Juan, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start by just acknowledging, the whole purpose of our organization is to acknowledge the 2% of male educators of color that are in the classrooms. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, you all are running this thing, right? This panel, and I'm sitting here like I probably wasn't even needed. But it's important that when thinking about the diversity that's present in our schools and as well as in our classrooms, it's invaluable in terms of it's very valuable to the students, of course, the amount of experience and knowledge that they're able to gain when someone that looks like them is directly in front of them creating the instruction. Studies have shown that white students as well as Black students are 5 times more likely to graduate high school just by having one Black male educator in the classroom. And there's been a lot of conversations around the importance of diversity, especially with the amount of teacher vacancies that are present. So when we think about the importance and what's needed to keep us there, we hone in on the retention and thinking about the community and the needed support that educator has around them at the time. Opportunities such as this where we can engage with those that are in various levels of school leadership in comparison to just being an educator in the classroom, being able to share our experiences across levels so that way we can work collaboratively in a manner that creates stronger support for our staff. And one of the really insightful things that we've been able to practice this year is the focus of SEL initiatives for our educators. a lot of research has been done for students and SEL work and the importance for them to have that time to reflect. And with COVID and all of the experiences that educators have experienced now, there are a lot of factors that are causing us to need that time to reflect on our own. Not that it's a problem, but there's been other states where the bulk of the influence is coming for incentives for new educators to, hey, we'll give you this incentive to come join us. And there's someone that's right directly behind that person making that decision that's begging for more, right? Begging for more resources, begging for more curriculum support. So when we think about the importance of diversity in the classroom, it stretches just beyond gender, beyond race. It stretches across all factors of cultures, and thinking about that child has to be able to understand what this culture goes through, what this culture experiences, so that way they can reflect on their own experiences and be able to grow as a leader in their community.
Thank you so much. Michelle, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I definitely agree with Juan that all students benefit when we have teachers of color. And one of the main benefits that I've seen is they don't have that deficit view that many have about our children of color. Like, oh, they can't for this reason, poverty, missing parent. There are no excuses. It is you get it together and I will help you get there. So that's definitely a benefit of having those high expectations for students of color. And the things I was thinking about, especially that second part of that question. So what supports do teachers need in the pipeline? And we have to start early. And one of the things, I have a couple of suggestions, I'll be brief. One is opportunities before they get to college. We have a program in high school, Educator program, that one of our teachers teaches. And before COVID, they will actually go out to the schools and actually interact with students. And so they learn some of the basics of what teachers actually do. Another thing is alternative licensure, which has been talked about before. Oh, yes, teacher cadet. Thank you, Tamika. But yes, alternative to the praxis. We know that historically why the praxis was created, and it is to limit the access for people of color to become educators. But when teachers take that alternative licensure, they're going to need some ongoing support. So we can't just leave them there. We have to continue supporting them as they go on, especially since many teachers of color are put in hard to staff schools. That definitely needs to be ongoing support. Next one is access to funding. I was a part, and they just released the Ed Trust, released their loan forgiveness survey, loan debt forgiveness that they had for just borrowers of color, period. But especially looking into that, how much it is to borrow to go to school versus how much a teacher gets paid, and how it feels like eternity. When I die, I'll still owe Sally Mae. It's one of those things. It's like they'll be knocking on my casket. But you have to think about that. How much is borrowed when you already are at the poverty line versus how much you're going to have when you get there. I mean, some of these are mortgage payments. And lastly, to recruit and retain is, again, going back to that ongoing support and isolation that has failed. I myself was going to apply for a job, and I looked on the website and I clicked the button for staff, and I was like, oh no, there's not anyone that looks like me. I'm not going to put myself in this situation. I already feel that it's going to be something uncomfortable to do, especially since that position was a leadership position and I would come in from another district. So I just backed away from that. But that feeling of isolation, teachers of color need to drive the conversation. What do they need? And the needs are different. And I was a part of research. I think it was Alexis Riley, and I was part of her research where she got Black women STEM teachers together in the conversations we were allowed to have, our very own safe space. And it was just magnificent. I enjoyed it because I didn't feel all alone there. So those are some of my suggestions. Gives them opportunities for alternative licensure with ongoing support, access to funding for school, and let the teachers of color drive the conversation on what they need.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I saw a cartoon the other day, and I don't know if all of you saw it, but it said, my son lives paycheck to paycheck. And the other cartoonist said, well, he needs to get an education. And the other one said, well, he's a teacher. And I thought, how sad, but it's about where we are right now in education. So I agree with you. Some things need to be changed. Our last question, we have about 5 minutes, and this is for everyone. And how can educators become leaders in their schools? And not only become leaders, but how can they create and bring about change in that school? So we'll start with Valencia. If you'll just kick us off there.
I sure will. And I think I go back to what I said earlier. I mean, I really think that it takes you going to talk with your leadership, being bold and brave enough to have a real authentic conversation about what it is that you are attempting to do. I mean, that's how I started this work. I went to my principal. I said, hey, I just finished watching this documentary, America to Me, and I'm now able to put a name to, or the terminology to some of the things that I'm feeling. And I don't want my other historically marginalized students to feel the same thing I felt. So I'm ready to take action. And he's like, well, would you like to start this and put this on the school improvement team? No, because I don't think that it should be something that is mandatory. Let's find those people who are serious about this work, which led to engaging parents, which led to students getting involved, which also led into the janitors. I think instructional assistants and janitors have a true pulse on the school. They hear and know, and they have a loud voice that can help us all. So definitely, I just say be brave, be bold, and engage in this work.
Thank you, Valencia. Juan, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I would. I think it goes back to just being yourself, being you, to a lot of what Valencia said, being courageous in who you are. I think of the 3 C's. This is just my personal, form of affirmation for myself, but, competent. So that's internal reflection, as well as, research, or if you're bringing a new program into your school or to your administration, make sure that you have the proper competence level of that particular task. And then confidence. Once you establish who you are and you realize the impact that you're about to make, you begin to walk with more confidence, and you're able to establish yourself at that school and within that school culture. And the last thing is compensation. Hopefully at the end of your task, you'll be able to be compensated for your hard work. Oftentimes that looks like a new program at your school. It looks like new curriculum, if that was the primary focus, or being able to spread your knowledge to other members of your community, your school community. So never be afraid to shy away from the conversation, but also make sure that you're reflective and that you prioritize those needs. At times it can feel as though there's a lot coming at you at one time. When thinking about race and centering yourself in that conversation, be sure to attack the issues, in a manner that allows you to get through your entire goal.
Thank you, Juan. Michelle?
So as we think about, I like what Valencia and of course Juan said, but that legwork of putting that in, it's going to start with data. Our admin is numbers. They're numbers people. How is this going to affect? What is the problem? What is the gap? They need to be able to see those numbers. So there's going to have to be some pre-work in when you go in and kind of come in with a suggestion of how it goes. One of the things with our Seed Fellows program is it's a grassroots. It started with me and Burroughs Wellcome Fund partnering with me, and we started reaching out to informal and formal educators, STEM educators around North Carolina. And a lot of those teachers have started these conversations with the people that are like-minded, like they are in their buildings, because it's one of those things a lot of people don't talk about, but when you find those people that do, you want to talk about it and you want to learn more and engage. And they are off doing some fantastic projects of building that and being the cultural change agents in their school from being in our program.
Thank you, Michelle. Susanna?
I think the best thing that I can add would be to listen. And it would be to listen to every stakeholder. So I serve as the vice president of our local chapter of NCAE, and I think the greatest thing I've learned from watching the incredible organizers that work for NCAE is how to listen. And I learned about listening from that mentor in New York City who spoke at the parent-teacher conferences. it's listening to community members, it's listening to peers, it's listening to students, and it's then being responsive to the needs that you hear them articulate. And then modeling what it looks like to be responsive in that regard, and then having those important conversations that all of you have articulated so beautifully with the right people, and to say, look how powerful it is to have those conversations with our community, listen to them, respond to it, and then look at the impact that it has, and then continue to especially with beginning teachers, continue to model those best practices of community building, and continue to offer oneself as that advocate and that leader for those beginning teachers. I think oftentimes new members to communities, such as a school, are most open to and ready to hear from the perspective of someone who's been listening for a while. So I can't speak loudly enough about just how powerful it is when you show and model what it means to be responsive to those you've listened to in your community and who you're serving.
Thank you all so much. I could go on and on and on, but one of the most powerful things that we said today was that this is hard work. It really is. It pulls at our heartstrings. I told someone a while back, this work reminds me of servant work. Because we're not getting paid what we deserve, but it is servant work. But when I was writing my dissertation, I always believed this because I was a student who failed it. But that I came across some research, and I can't remember who wrote it because it's been so long ago. But it said that the best and most overlooked, the most overlooked best practice in education is the student-teacher relationship. And that goes back to listening, that goes back to building relationship, that goes back to trust, all of the things that we've talked about today. So we have had a great conversation, and it's now for the Q&A. And I know all of you have a wealth of knowledge that you would like to share. So I'm going to go to the Q&A, and let's look at some of the questions we have. One question I think we've already addressed, it said, we need teachers of color for sure. How can we make this happen? And I think Michelle gave a lot of input, she and Juan, as it related to that. Funding, support as it relates to licensure. I think there needs to be different avenues for licensure. Is there anything else you would like to add to that question?
I would just say that I know we've had insightful conversations, and this isn't something that could be changed, tomorrow. But when we think about reasons why educators are not going into the profession, I think it boils down to watering the roots and thinking about some of the systems that are preventing people from wanting to go into the profession. And to your point that you mentioned earlier, Connie, I think one part of it is the branding of being an educator. I found it ironic that I was in a conversation of a cohort of leaders, and we spoke about career days and how we don't view ourselves as the people that should be there, right? We're in that space. But thinking about branding Educated, and also thinking about growth and career paths in education. I know when I joined as an educator in 2012, it was biology teacher, and then hopefully I'll be a principal. So thinking about how we can compensate educators to become more instructional coaches, master student teacher, student lead, department chairs, and things, other ways in which educators can grow in the profession without always having to achieve the ultimate feat of becoming a school administrator, where they feel as though they can grow within their school culture. Two things that I think are the reasons why we can water our roots and think about some of those barriers that are preventing gentlemen for profound gentlemen, but also women to enter the profession.
Thank you, Juan. Next question. This individual says, I teach at a full-time virtual school, and many schools are mostly virtual last year. I work hard to provide the relationships, but it's easy for students to avoid those attempts in a virtual environment. How can we bridge that divide? How can we develop a sense of community in a virtual setting is basically what she's asking.
Okay, if I could. Oh, I'm sorry, Susanna.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Please go ahead. No, please do. Please, after you.
I'm excited about this because I actually got a chance to present this idea because I taught virtual all last year. I was a teacher on loan, and it was very difficult the first semester, everybody getting used to it, screens off and whatnot. But what I started doing was asking just general questions. So we would have a question of the day, and we've continued that even now, building that sense of community by having a simple question of the day. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? What is the best pizza topping? And sometimes we'd have these things called controversial questions of the day. You know, who makes the best fries? Oh my goodness, kids will talk up, they will be in the chat, they will do that. And you just start building every day something. Doesn't always have to be related to content. It could tie in. I've had a couple that tie in, say, oh, by the way, remember our question of the day that we had? But that builds that sense of community. And they started talking to each other through chat and calling out, and they just became more comfortable with the environment that they were in. So it took a couple weeks, but they were becoming really engaged with that. And it's very interesting that now that I'm back in person and some of the students still come up to me, I never saw their face, and I only see half their face now with the mask, but how engaged they were from just having these general talks and conversations that would take, yes, 5 to 10 minutes, but I could still get the content in. I wasn't worried about it. So that's a simple way to build relationships in a virtual environment.
Yeah, and if I may just build off of that, Michelle, because I found that much to what I was saying earlier around community meetings, I actually had a pretty successful time translating the structure of the community meeting that I've used to the virtual space. And so there's still that predictability. So instead of a talking piece, you know, that we pass around the circle, we have a prescribed order. So everyone knows who to pass the greeting to. There's still a morning message that's presented on the screen, and someone, you know, I draw an equity stick and someone still is able to read it. We would have little interactive games where, you know, they'd pin each other and play mirror. And so I had the joy of being able to see all 15 of them doing weird, you know, and we still had our Friday song, and we still did the things I would do in a normal environment. But again, it was that routine, and it was super awkward at first. The first month was so uncomfortable and it was clunky. But really, in reflection, it kind of always is, but it was just maybe more pronounced because of the virtual space. But over time, I mean, we had what, 6-7 months of it. Over time, they started leading the morning meeting, and there's so many interesting things you can do. You know, I do like zones of regulation check-ins, so I would have them put in the color they were feeling that day, or you know, I'd have them do a journal prompt and then choose whether they wanted to share it. And then once we went back to in-person learning, it was like we'd done it in person all year because that routine was there. So I think no matter what, it takes time. But just to echo your sentiment, Michelle, I feel like even what seem like simple things have an enormous impact in building that community. Any opportunity they have to feel seen, heard, or connected, you know, is powerful.
Thank you, ladies. We have another question, and I'll take this. It says, I have a student who is interested in learning about their Native American heritage. What resources are available? I would tell them to reach out to their tribal communities, and talk to the elders in their communities, and get involved in their tribal events that are going on in their schools. I mean, in their tribal communities. But I also would like to encourage teachers that a couple of years ago, the State Advisory Council on Indian Education developed a module, and it is in home base, that teachers can go in and complete that module so that they have some insight on the American Indian culture and the 8 recognized tribes that reside in North Carolina. Because a lot of times teachers have made statements, and I don't mean this disrespectful, but out of ignorance, and they will say, we don't have Indians anymore. Well, we do. Let me tell you, we're still here, because I'm still alive and breathing. And so are my children and many more of us. We're here. So I think if we go into and we take part in that module, you get 1 CEU credit for completing it. It gives you not everything you need to know, but a general background so that you can connect with your students that are in your class. So thank you for that question. And I think we may have time for one more question. Let me see. This question: if we strictly continue with our cultural classroom and curriculum, how will our children grow beyond who they are? Who wants to take that one? Should I read it again?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If we strictly continue with our cultural classroom and curriculum, how will our children grow beyond who they are? Not quite understanding that myself. Not quite understanding.
Yeah, I was going to attempt to answer. Yeah, I probably couldn't answer that one. I would need a little bit more context.
Yeah. So we're not quite sure on that question, but it is almost 5:45. So we're supposed to take time to fill in the graphic organizer. I want to stop here and just thank all of these wonderful panelists. It has been my honor to moderate this group of educators and scholars and people that really care about educational equity for all children, not just for children of color, but for all children. And that's what we have to stress, that this is just not about our Black and brown children. This is about all children in that classroom. And when we stress that and we embrace that, then we realize that what we're doing is impacting everybody. When I learn about another culture, it's impacting me. And when they learn about my culture, it's impacting them. So I am really thankful for all of you and for your work in the field of education. I was in the classroom for 17 years. So those of you that are still in the classroom, I applaud you. I know this has been a very difficult couple of years and you are still hanging in there doing wonderful work. I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for the work that you're doing. I thank you. I want to say this from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for caring about our kids. I think that's the most important. I am where I am today because of my fourth grade teacher. I'll never forget Miss Mathay. She was an African-American lady and she loved me dearly. And I thought I was the only person that she loved, but I realized she was that way by everybody. But she made me the woman I am today. And I am so thankful for her. And I'm thankful for all of our educators and what you do, even in these difficult times.
Hey, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm with the Public School Forum, and thank you so much for joining us these past couple of days. It's been incredible to listen to you all, learning so much. So yeah, we are going to share a couple of things in the chat. We're going to share the evaluation for today. And we are also going to share the graphic organizer again. The evaluation for those of you who are seeking CEU credits is super important, especially. So we, of course, when we hear from everyone, all of your feedback, we really do read through it and take it to heart. But please go ahead and fill out that evaluation. You will get information on CEUs. Take a look in the chat also for the graphic organizer if you don't have that link already. And we would also encourage you to share your biggest aha from today online using our hashtag Color of Education. And then one more quick shout out to our supporters. You've seen this a few times, but we of course could not do this without our supporters. That concludes our session. Please take some time with your graphic organizer and your takeaway moments. Thank you again, panelists, for all of your time. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for attending, y'all.